I'm in the OECD responsible for collecting comparable data on labour market programme spending. And there, frequently, the sheer difficulty of getting information that's really comparable and then describing that adequately is very substantial. So, in fact, a lot of researchers across the world are using data, really not wanting to look too closely at how weak those data are in terms of accuracy. And this is partly because of the fluid nature of something like employment services, labour market programs. I mean, the training program, as I mentioned in my presentation, can cover such a big variety of different things that we would like, ideally, to be able to compare countries and say, look, this country does well, and the international differences in outcomes correlate with the international differences in policies. In fact, when you look at our measures of policies, they are really quite weak and not comparable. And similarly, the same issue arises through time, that it's often possible to compare what a country is now with where it was 5 years ago. When you start going back to 20 years ago, it gets a lot more difficult. And yet, a lot of the big reforms that we've seen in labour market policy have tended to take, I tend to say something like, a country maybe spend a decade with a continuously high unemployment rate, a decade reforming the system, and then it has a good decade when it's got a lower unemployment rate because the reforms are good. Unfortunately, then at that stage, different forces may come along. People are no longer so worried about unemployment, and they become an increasing voices calling for improvement in social conditions and so on. And possibly the good result may be lost again. But to really track that, it really requires a sort of decade-to-decade perspective